Sister Margaret Chen sat in the chapel, her weathered hands folded in her lap, but her fingers moved ever so slightly. Anyone watching closely would have noticed the subtle motion, like she was pressing invisible keys in the air. It was a habit she couldn't break even after 6 months of silence. At 81 years old, Sister Margaret had spent more than 60 years inside the walls of St. Catherine's Convent. The stone building had become more than her home. It was her entire world. But before she wore the simple gray habit and white veil of a nun, before she took vows of poverty and obedience, Margaret Chen had been someone quite different. She had been a piano prodigy. Her parents, Chinese immigrants who ran a small restaurant in New York, had noticed something special about their daughter when she was just 4 years old. Little Margaret would hum complex melodies after hearing them only once. She could pick out songs on their old piano by ear, her tiny fingers finding the right notes as if guided by instinct. By age 7, she was studying at a prestigious music school. By 15, she had performed at Carnegie Hall. Her teachers at Juilliard whispered in the hallways that Margaret Chen could become one of the greatest pianists of her generation. Concert halls across America wanted to book her. Record companies called her parents' restaurant, trying to reach the teenage sensation. But Margaret felt something pulling at her heart that had nothing to do with applause or fame. During her final year at Juilliard, she attended a Sunday service at a small church near campus. The choir sang and something inside her shifted. It wasn't the music itself, though it was beautiful. It was the feeling behind it. The pure devotion. The way these people sang not for an audience but for something greater than themselves. She started attending that church every week. Then she began volunteering at their soup kitchen. She met the nuns from St. Catherine's Convent who came to help feed the homeless. These women had so little, yet they seemed to possess something Margaret's successful music career couldn't give her. They had peace. They had purpose. At 19, just weeks before she was supposed to sign her first major recording contract, Margaret made a choice that shocked everyone who knew her. She entered St. Catherine's Convent as a postulant, the first step toward becoming a nun. Her parents wept. Her teachers felt betrayed. The music world called it a tragic waste of talent, but Margaret never looked back. She had found what she was searching for. For the next 62 years, Sister Margaret lived a quiet life of prayer and service. She taught children at the convent school. She cared for elderly sisters in the infirmary. She scrubbed floors and worked in the garden. And yes, she played piano. The old upright piano in the common room became her joy. She played hymns during chapel services, her fingers dancing across the keys with the same brilliance they'd shown at Carnegie Hall. During recreation time, the other sisters would gather around as she played, their faces glowing with happiness. She played at Christmas celebrations and feast days. She played softly in the evenings when the day's work was done. The piano's wood had grown smooth under her hands over the decades. Some of the keys stuck a little, and it was always slightly out of tune, but to Sister Margaret it was perfect. Through that instrument she could still express what words could never capture. Her music became prayer, became love, became the voice of her devotion. The other sisters loved her for it. Sister Anne, who had arthritis so bad she could barely walk, would close her eyes and smile when Sister Margaret played. Young Sister Beth, who had joined the convent just 2 years ago and still got homesick, said the music made her feel less alone. Even Mother Superior Beatrice, who ran the convent for 30 years, would sometimes pause in the hallway just to listen. But everything changed when Mother Superior Beatrice retired. The new Mother Superior, a woman named Catherine Rodriguez, came from a much stricter religious order out west. She was younger than most of the sisters expected, only 55, with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of discipline. She believed the convent had grown too relaxed, too comfortable. She intended to bring them back to what she called authentic religious life. Within her first week, she changed the schedule. More time for silent prayer, less time for recreation. Within her first month, she changed the rules about speaking. Conversation was now limited to necessary communication only. No more friendly chats during meals or evening gatherings. The sisters adjusted as best they could. After all, obedience was part of their vows, but then Mother Superior Catherine made an announcement that struck Sister Margaret like a physical blow. Instrumental music is a distraction, she declared during their weekly chapter meeting. It pulls our minds away from contemplation and prayer. From this day forward, the piano will remain closed. We will embrace silence as our ancestors in faith did. Sister Margaret felt her heart sink. She looked around at the other sisters. Sister Anne's eyes filled with tears. Young Sister Beth stared at the floor. No one dared to speak up. No one questioned Mother Superior Catherine's decision. That evening, Sister Margaret walked slowly to the common room. The piano sat there as it always had, but now its lid was closed. A small lock had been fitted to keep it that way. She reached out and touched the smooth wood, feeling the grain beneath her fingertips. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears didn't change circumstances. Instead, she bowed her head and accepted it as she had been taught. God's will, she told herself. Perhaps she had been too attached to the music. Perhaps this was a lesson in letting go. But as the weeks turned into months, something inside Sister Margaret began to fade. Her steps grew slower. Her smile, which had always come so easily, appeared less often. During prayers, her hands would move unconsciously, fingers pressing against her lap in silent scales and arpeggios. Her body remembered what her life had become too disciplined to express. The other sisters noticed. Sister Anne mentioned it one day during their brief aloud conversation. "Are you well, Margaret? You seem dimmer somehow." Sister Margaret just nodded and smiled. "I'm fine. Just getting older, I suppose," but she wasn't fine. For 62 years, music had been her way of speaking to God, of expressing the joy and devotion that filled her heart. Without it, she felt like a bird whose wings had been clipped. She could still pray with words, still serve with her hands, still love with her heart. But something essential was missing. At night, lying in her small room, she would close her eyes and hear music in her head. Chopin's nocturnes, Bach's preludes, the hymns she used to play for Sunday services. Her fingers would move against the thin blanket, playing concerts that only she could hear. She never complained. She never asked Mother Superior Catherine to reconsider. That wasn't her way. Sister Margaret Chen, who had once held audiences spellbound with her gift, now held her silence with the same grace she had once held the world's attention. But 6 months after the piano was locked, something happened that would change everything. A letter arrived at the convent announcing a visit that would force Sister Margaret to make a choice she never thought she'd face again. The music inside her, silent for so long, was about to find its voice once more. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early October. Sister Beth brought it to Mother Superior Catherine during breakfast, and everyone in the dining hall could see the way the Mother Superior's eyes widened as she read it. After the meal, she called an emergency meeting. All 32 sisters gathered in the chapter room, wondering what could be so important. Mother Superior Catherine stood at the front, holding the letter in her hands like it was made of gold. "Sisters," she began, her voice more animated than anyone had heard in months, "we have received incredible news. Mrs. Eleanor Vandermeer wishes to visit our convent." A murmur went through the room. Even Sister Margaret, sitting quietly in the back, knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Eleanor Vandermeer was one of the wealthiest women in the state, known for her generous donations to churches, hospitals, and charitable organizations. Her late husband had made a fortune in technology, and since his death 5 years ago, she had dedicated herself to giving that money away to worthy causes. "She's considering a substantial donation to St. Catherine's," Mother Superior Catherine continued, and now her eyes were actually shining. She mentioned the possibility of funding the restoration of our East Wing, updating our heating system, and expanding our community kitchen. The sisters looked at each other with hope. The East Wing had been closed for 3 years because chunks of ceiling plaster kept falling. Last winter, they'd all huddled in the few rooms where the ancient heating system still worked. And their community kitchen, where they fed 200 homeless people every week, was bursting at the seams with need. "This donation," Mother Superior Catherine said carefully, "could change everything for us. It could allow us to continue our work for decades to come, perhaps even expand our outreach to the community." She paused, looking around at each sister. "Mrs. Vandermeer will visit us next week. I expect everyone to be on their best behavior. Our daily routine should reflect our devotion and discipline. She needs to see that we are worthy stewards of her generosity." For the next 7 days, the convent became a flurry of activity. The sisters scrubbed floors that were already clean. They polished the chapel's brass until it gleamed. They practiced their prayers and made sure their habits were perfectly pressed. Mother Superior Catherine personally inspected every room, making notes about what needed attention. Sister Margaret helped as much as her 81-year-old body would allow. She worked in the kitchen, preparing the simple refreshments they would serve. She dusted the common room, her hand pausing briefly on the locked piano before moving on. She wanted this donation to happen as much as anyone. Their work in the community mattered. The homeless families who came to their kitchen needed them. The day of the visit arrived with autumn sunshine streaming through the stained glass windows. At precisely 10 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up to the convent's entrance. The driver opened the back door, and Eleanor Vandermeer stepped out. She was tall and elegant, probably in her mid-70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple but expensive-looking blue dress and pearl earrings. But what struck Sister Margaret watching from a window was the woman's eyes. They were kind, but also searching, as if she was looking for something specific. Mother Superior Catherine greeted her warmly at the door. "Mrs. Vandermeer, welcome to St. Catherine's Convent. We are deeply honored by your visit." "Please call me Eleanor," the woman said with a gentle smile. "And the honor is mine. I've heard wonderful things about your work here." The tour began in the chapel. Eleanor walked slowly through the space, taking in the simple wooden pews, the modest altar, the plain cross on the wall. "Beautiful," she murmured. "There's something peaceful about simplicity." They moved through the building, visiting the infirmary where elderly sisters were cared for, the classrooms where they had once taught children, the kitchen where meals for the homeless were prepared. Eleanor asked thoughtful questions about everything. How many sisters lived there? What were their daily routines? How did they support themselves? What kind of community work did they do? Mother Superior Catherine answered each question carefully, emphasizing their dedication to prayer and service. She showed Eleanor the east wing with its crumbling plaster and water-stained walls. She explained how they had to close it, but desperately needed the space. Eleanor nodded, taking notes in a small leather journal. Sister Margaret was part of a group of sisters assigned to serve tea in the common room after the tour. She carried a tray of simple cookies she had baked that morning, moving quietly among the guests as Mother Superior Catherine and Eleanor settled into chairs. That's when it happened. Eleanor's eyes drifted across the room and landed on the piano. Her entire demeanor changed. She stood up and walked over to it, her fingers trailing along its polished surface with obvious affection. "Oh my," she said softly. "What a beautiful instrument. Is it very old?" Mother Superior Catherine shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, it's been here for many years. Do the sisters play?" Eleanor asked, and there was something hopeful in her voice. The room went very quiet. Sister Margaret, standing near the wall with her empty tray, felt her heart begin to pound. "We maintain a practice of contemplative silence," Mother Superior Catherine said carefully. "We find that it helps us focus more deeply on prayer and meditation." Eleanor turned to look at her, and Sister Margaret could see disappointment crossing her face. "I see," she said quietly. She returned to her seat, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. They had tea. They made small talk. Mother Superior Catherine showed Eleanor detailed plans for how they would use a donation. She presented budgets and timelines. She spoke passionately about their mission and their needs, but Eleanor seemed distracted. She kept glancing at the piano. Finally, as the visit was winding down and Mother Superior Catherine was walking her toward the door, Eleanor stopped. She turned to face the Mother Superior, and her expression was kind but firm. "Mother Superior Catherine," she said, "I need to be honest with you." Everyone in the hallway froze. Sister Margaret, who had been heading back to the kitchen, paused. "I've visited many institutions over the years," Eleanor continued. "I can read financial reports and understand structural needs from any office. That's not why I visit in person." Mother Superior Catherine's face went pale. "I don't understand." "I visit because I need to feel the spirit of a place," Eleanor explained. "I need to understand what makes it alive, what makes it special. I need to connect with the heart of an organization before I commit to supporting it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "My late husband, Robert, was a composer. Music was the language we spoke together. It was how we understood joy and sorrow and everything in between. When he died, I found comfort in music. It felt like he was still speaking to me." Mother Superior Catherine nodded, but Sister Margaret could see she didn't understand where this was going. "Before I make any decision," Eleanor said gently, "I would love to hear that piano played. Just a simple hymn. Something that shows me the soul of St. Catherine's. Something that helps me understand who you are beyond the budget. Reports and building plans. The silence that followed was deafening. Mother Superior. Catherine's face flushed red. Mrs. Vandermeer, as I explained, we don't use the piano anymore. It's part of our commitment to contemplative silence. I respect that, Eleanor said, and her voice was genuinely kind. I truly do. But I also must be honest about my values. I believe music is prayer-given voice. I believe it connects us to something divine. If there's no music here, if that gift is locked away... She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. She picked up her purse. Perhaps St. Catherine's isn't the right match for my foundation's mission. I'm looking for places where the spirit soars, where gifts are celebrated, where joy is part of devotion. Mother Superior Catherine looked like she might faint. The east wing, the heating system, the expanded kitchen, all of it was slipping away. That's when Sister Margaret did something she hadn't done in 60 years of religious life. She stepped forward and spoke without being asked. Mother Superior, her quiet voice cut through the tension. If I may. Every head in the hallway turned toward her. The elderly nun stood there, small and humble in her gray habit, her hands trembling slightly. I could play something, she said softly, if you permit it. The hallway was so quiet you could hear the old clock ticking in the chapel. Sister Margaret stood there, her words hanging in the air like a question that couldn't be taken back. Mother Superior Catherine stared at her. In all the years Sister Margaret had been at St. Catherine's, through 3 different Mother Superiors, she had never once spoken out of turn. She had never challenged a decision. She had never asked for special treatment. She was the model of obedience and humility. And now here she was, stepping forward when she hadn't been called, speaking when she hadn't been addressed, offering to break a rule that the Mother Superior herself had put in place. The other sisters held their breath. Sister Anne gripped her walking cane tighter. Young Sister Beth's eyes were wide. Even Sister Patricia, who had been at the convent for 40 years and rarely showed emotion, looked shocked. Eleanor Vandermeer watched the scene with quiet interest, her eyes moving between the elderly nun and the Mother Superior. Mother Superior Catherine's jaw tightened. Sister Margaret could see the conflict playing out on her face. The Mother Superior was a woman who valued rules and order above all else. She had made her position clear. Music was a distraction. The piano would stay locked. But Sister Margaret could also see something else in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or worry. The convent needed this donation desperately. Without it, they might have to close the community kitchen. They might have to send some of the elderly sisters to other convents because they couldn't maintain the building. Everything they had worked for could crumble. The seconds stretched out. Sister Margaret kept her eyes lowered respectfully, waiting. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Finally, Mother Superior Catherine spoke. Her voice was tight, controlled. Mrs. Vandermeer, this is highly irregular. We have our rules for good reasons. Of course, Eleanor said gently, and I wouldn't want to cause any conflict. But I did explain that music is important to me. It's how I understand the heart of a place. Another long silence. Mother Superior Catherine looked at Sister Margaret again, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. A recognition of sacrifice. Very well, the Mother Superior said, and each word seemed to cost her something. Sister Margaret, you may play. Just this once. The hallway seemed to exhale. Sister Beth actually smiled. Sister Anne's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Mother Superior, Sister Margaret said quietly. Her hands were shaking now, and not just from age. 6 months. It had been 6 months since she had touched those keys. They all moved back to the common room. The sisters who had scattered during the confrontation suddenly appeared again, gathering near the walls. No one wanted to miss this. Even Sister Patricia, who usually avoided group activities, came and stood in the doorway. Eleanor settled into a chair near the piano, her face expectant and kind. Mother Superior Catherine sat stiffly in another chair, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like she was preparing for something painful. Sister Margaret walked slowly to the piano. Each step felt significant, like she was crossing a bridge she had thought was burned forever. She stood before the instrument, and her weathered hand reached out to touch the lid. It was still locked. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest, but then Sister Beth hurried forward with a small key, her young face flushed. She must have gotten it from the Mother Superior's office. She unlocked the piano and lifted the lid, and the action felt ceremonial somehow. Sacred. Sister Margaret looked down at the keys. They were the same as she remembered, ivory and ebony, slightly yellowed with age, some more worn than others from decades of use. Her fingers knew every imperfection. That one key that stuck sometimes. That note that was always a bit flat. They were old friends. She sat down on the bench, adjusting her habit. The wood was cool beneath her. She placed her hands over the keys, not touching them yet, just hovering. Her fingers trembled. 6 months of silence. 6 months of playing only in her dreams. Her fingers moving against bedsheets and prayer books, making music that only she could hear. What should she play? Eleanor had asked for a simple hymn. Something appropriate. Something safe. She could play Amazing Grace or Be Thou My Vision. Something that would satisfy the request without making waves. Something that wouldn't upset Mother Superior Catherine more than she already had. But as Sister Margaret sat there, her hands above the keys, she felt something stirring inside her. Something that had been locked away just like this piano. It wasn't rebellion exactly. It wasn't pride. It was just truth. She closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her life. 19 years old, walking away from Carnegie Hall and recording contracts. 62 years of scrubbing floors and teaching children and caring for the sick. 62 years of choosing service over spotlights. 62 years of letting go of everything except faith. She had given up so much. Willingly, gladly. She had never regretted her choice to enter the convent, but she had never given up who she was. The music had always been part of her, as essential as breathing. It was how she prayed, how she loved, how she understood God. Her fingers touched the keys. She didn't play a simple hymn. Instead, she played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece she had performed at her final recital before entering St. Catherine's 62 years ago. Back when she was just Margaret Chen, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, making an impossible choice between two kinds of calling. The first notes floated into the room, soft and gentle. The melody was like liquid silver, flowing and bending, full of emotion that words could never capture. Sister Margaret's eyes remained closed. Her aged fingers, which trembled when she held a teacup, were suddenly sure and steady on the keys. Muscle memory took over. More than that, soul memory. This wasn't just technique, though her technique was still remarkable. This wasn't just a performance, though it was performed beautifully. This was everything she had been and everything she had become poured into music. Every prayer she had whispered in the dark. Every moment of doubt and every moment of certainty. Every sacrifice and every joy. The piano itself seemed to wake up after its 6 months of silence. The notes rang out clear and true, filling the common room, spilling into the hallways, reaching up to the high ceilings. Sister Anne, standing against the wall, felt tears sliding down her wrinkled cheeks. She had missed this so much. The music had been like light in their days, and without it everything had felt grayer. Young Sister Beth was crying too, her hand pressed to her mouth. She'd only been at the convent for 2 years, but Sister Margaret's music had been one of the things that made her feel at home. When it was taken away, the silence had felt crushing. Even Sister Patricia, who prided herself on emotional control, found her eyes growing wet. And Eleanor Vandermeer sat very still, her face transformed. This was what she had been looking for. This was the heart of a place. Not in budget reports or building plans, but in this moment. In this gift that had been locked away but never lost. In this elderly woman who had given up everything except the one thing she could never give up, because it was too much a part of her soul. Mother Superior Catherine watched Sister Margaret play, and something was happening inside her too. Something uncomfortable, something that felt like shame maybe or regret. She saw perhaps for the first time what she had taken from her community. Not just music, but joy, expression, a way of connecting with God that was different from silent meditation but no less valid. The music swelled and dipped, carrying them all along like a river. Time seemed to stop. The modern world outside the convent walls fell away. There was only this room, these women, and this beautiful, heartbreaking music. Sister Margaret played on, her whole being focused on the keys, on the notes, on the feeling flowing through her fingers. This might be the last time she ever played. If that was true, she would make it count. She would pour everything into it. The piece moved toward its conclusion, the notes climbing and then descending, building to something both sad and hopeful at the same time. And then, the final note. The final note hung in the air, fading slowly like the last light of sunset. Sister Margaret kept her hands on the keys, her head bowed, her eyes still closed. She was breathing hard as if she had just climbed a mountain. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence after the music was different from the silence before it. It was full instead of empty, sacred instead of merely quiet. Then Eleanor Vandermeer stood up. She walked across the room, her footsteps the only sound, and placed both her hands gently on Sister Margaret's shoulders. That, Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion, was prayer. That was the voice of God I've been listening for. Sister Margaret opened her eyes. Tears were streaming down her face, and she hadn't even realized she was crying. She looked up at Eleanor and saw that the wealthy woman was crying too. Eleanor turned to face Mother Superior Catherine, who sat frozen in her chair, her own face wet with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. "I will triple my intended donation," Eleanor said, and her voice was stronger now, more certain. "But I have one condition." Mother Superior Catherine straightened up, trying to compose herself. "What condition?" "This gift," Eleanor gestured to Sister Margaret still sitting at the piano, "must be honored, not locked away. These women serve God in your community with their whole lives. They've given up everything. Let them have this small joy. Let them have music." The Mother Superior opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked around the room at her sisters. All of them were crying. Every single one. Sister Anne was leaning heavily on her cane, tears running freely down her weathered face. Young Sister Beth had her hands clasped together like she was praying. Sister Patricia, who never showed emotion, was actually smiling through her tears. Mother Superior Catherine saw something in that moment. She saw what her rules had done. She had thought she was bringing discipline and devotion. She had thought silence would bring them closer to God. But she had been wrong. "I understand," Mother Superior Catherine said quietly. "You're right." Eleanor nodded and squeezed Sister Margaret's shoulders one more time before stepping back. She gathered her purse and coat. "I'll have my lawyers draw up the papers. You should receive everything within the month." "And Sister Margaret," she turned back, "thank you. My husband would have loved to hear you play. You have a rare gift." Sister Margaret tried to speak but couldn't find words. She just nodded, wiping at her eyes with the sleeve of her habit. After Eleanor left, the sisters remained in the common room. Nobody seemed to know what to do. The piano lid was still open. Sister Margaret still sat on the bench, looking drained but somehow lighter than she had in months. Mother Superior Catherine stood at the front of the room. She cleared her throat and everyone turned to look at her. "Sisters," she began, and her voice was different now, softer, less certain. "I need to say something." The room was completely silent. When I came here, I believed I knew what was best. I believed that strict discipline and silence would bring us closer to God. I believed that anything that distracted from prayer was unnecessary. She paused, struggling with the words. "I was wrong," Sister Anne gasped softly. In all her years at the convent, she had never heard a Mother Superior admit to being wrong. "Today I saw something I should have seen months ago," Mother Superior Catherine continued. "Sister Margaret's music isn't a distraction from prayer. It is prayer. It's one of the most beautiful prayers I've ever witnessed." She looked directly at Sister Margaret. "I'm sorry. I took something precious from you, from all of you, because I was afraid. I was afraid of joy, maybe. Afraid that if we were too happy, we weren't being serious enough about our faith. But that was my fear, not God's will." Sister Margaret stood up slowly from the piano bench. She walked over to Mother Superior Catherine and did something that surprised everyone. She took the Mother Superior's hands in her own. "Thank you," Sister Margaret said simply. "From this day forward," Mother Superior Catherine announced to the room, "the piano will remain open. Sister Margaret, if you're willing, I would be honored if you would play for us again. Not just today, but whenever you wish." The room erupted. Not in noise, because these were still nuns who valued quiet, but in movement. Sisters rushed forward to hug Sister Margaret. Sister Anne was laughing and crying at the same time. Even Sister Patricia came over and squeezed Sister Margaret's hand. Young Sister Beth couldn't contain herself. Will you play something else, please? Sister Margaret looked to Mother Superior Catherine, who nodded with a small smile. She returned to the piano and this time played a hymn. A simple, beautiful hymn that they all knew, and something magical happened. The sisters began to sing, softly at first, then stronger. Their voices blended together, filling the room with harmony. Sister Anne sang despite her weak voice. Sister Beth sang with pure joy. Sister Patricia sang for the first time in years, and Mother Superior Catherine, standing in the back, sang too. They sang like they used to before the silence was mandated. They sang like they had been holding their breath for 6 months and could finally breathe again. That evening, Mother Superior Catherine called a special assembly in the chapter room. All the sisters gathered, curious about what would happen next. "I've been doing a lot of thinking today," the Mother Superior began, "about rules and why we have them, about discipline and what it really means, about God, and how we serve Him." She walked back and forth at the front of the room, choosing her words carefully. "When I came here, I thought your previous way of life was too relaxed. I thought you needed more structure, more silence, more suffering, maybe. I thought that's what religious life was supposed to be." She stopped and looked around at all of them. "But I forgot something important. I forgot that God gave us gifts. Each of you has gifts. Sister Anne has wisdom from her years of experience. Sister Beth has enthusiasm and fresh perspective. Sister Patricia has incredible organizational skills. And Sister Margaret has music." She paused. "These gifts are from God. Who am I to lock them away? Who am I to say that using your God-given talents is somehow wrong?" Sister Margaret felt something loosening in her chest, something that had been tight for 6 months. "I've also been thinking about our rules around conversation," Mother Superior Catherine continued. "Yes, we need times of silence for prayer and reflection. But we also need community. We need to talk to each other, to support each other, to laugh together sometimes." Sister Beth's eyes went wide. Was the Mother Superior really saying what it sounded like? "So, effective immediately, we're making some changes. We'll still have our times of silent prayer. That's important. But during meals and recreation time, you may speak freely. Share your days. Tell your stories. Be a community, not just individuals living in the same building." The sisters looked at each other with growing smiles. "And the piano," Mother Superior Catherine said, looking directly at Sister Margaret, "will be part of our daily life again. Music during services. Music during recreation. Music whenever Sister Margaret feels called to play." This time the room did erupt in sound. Not loud but joyful. Whispers of thank you and praise God, and finally, that night as Sister Margaret lay in her small bed, she could hardly believe what had happened. In one day everything had changed. The locked piano was open. The enforced silence was lifted. The joy that had been missing was returning. She thought about Eleanor Vandermeer and how one woman's simple request had transformed everything. She thought about Mother Superior Catherine and the courage it took to admit being wrong. She thought about her sisters and how they had all suffered in silence, waiting for this moment. But most of all, she thought about the music. How it had poured out of her after 6 months of being held inside. How her fingers had remembered every note. How it had felt like coming home. She flexed her hands in the darkness, feeling the slight ache in her knuckles. She was 81 years old. How many years did she have left to play? She didn't know. But however many days God gave her, she would use them. She would play. She would fill St. Catherine's with music again. She would use the gift she had been given, the gift she had almost lost. And as she drifted off to sleep, she could hear melodies in her head. Not sad anymore, not silent, but full of hope and possibility and joy. Tomorrow she would play again. And the day after that. And the day after that, the music had come home. The next morning, Sister Margaret woke up wondering if it had all been a dream. Had she really played yesterday? Had Mother Superior Catherine really changed her mind? Had the piano really been unlocked? She got dressed in the pre-dawn darkness as she had done for 62 years and made her way to the chapel for morning prayers. When she arrived, she noticed something different immediately. The other sisters were whispering to each other before prayers began, something that would have been forbidden just yesterday. And they were smiling. It hadn't been a dream. After prayers, they went to breakfast. And for the first time in 6 months, the dining hall was filled with conversation. Nothing loud or improper, just the gentle sound of sisters talking to each other, asking about each other's sleep, sharing small observations about the beautiful autumn morning, being human together. Sister Anne sat next to Sister Margaret and patted her hand. "I slept better last night than I have in months," she said, "knowing I'll hear you play again. It's like someone turned the lights back on." Sister Margaret smiled. "I'm just glad I remembered how." "Remembered?" Sister Anne laughed softly. "Child, you played like an angel yesterday. Some things you can't forget even if you wanted to." After breakfast, Sister Margaret went to the common room. She half expected to find the piano locked again, Mother Superior Catherine having changed her mind in the night. But the lid was still open, just as it had been left. She sat down and played softly, just practicing at first. Scales and arpeggios warming up her old fingers. Then she moved into a simple hymn. Within minutes, sisters began drifting into the room. Not to interrupt their duties, but just to pass through and listen for a moment. The music was like a magnet drawing them in. The weeks that followed brought more changes than Sister Margaret could have imagined. True to her word, Eleanor Vandermeer's donation arrived. It was even more generous than promised. The restoration of the East Wing began immediately. Contractors arrived with scaffolding and supplies. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the air, but it was a hopeful sound. The sound of renewal. The heating system was completely replaced. That winter, for the first time in years, every room in the convent was warm. The elderly sisters, who had spent previous winters bundled in layers of sweaters, could move freely through the building in comfort. But the biggest change was to the community kitchen. With the expanded funding, they were able to move into a larger space and serve 300 people instead of 200. They added new equipment, hired 2 part-time workers from the neighborhood, and extended their hours. Sister Margaret volunteered in the new kitchen 3 days a week. And she noticed something beautiful. When the homeless families came in for meals, they would often hear piano music drifting from the convent. Some of them asked about it. Word spread that there was a nun who had once been a concert pianist, who now played for the love of God and neighbor. People started asking if they could listen. Mother Superior Catherine, in her new spirit of openness, agreed. Once a month, they began hosting what they called Community Music Hour. Anyone from the neighborhood could come sit in the chapel while Sister Margaret played. No admission, no requirements, just music and peace. The first month, 12 people came. The second month, 30. By the 6th month, they had to add extra chairs. People from all walks of life filled the pews. Homeless men who came to the kitchen. Young mothers with restless toddlers who grew calm when the music started. Elderly folks from the neighborhood who had nowhere else to go. Students from the local college looking for a break from their stress. Sister Margaret played everything. Classical pieces from her old repertoire, hymns and sacred music. Sometimes she even took requests. A young woman once asked if she knew any jazz. And Sister Margaret surprised everyone by playing a beautiful rendition of "What a Wonderful World." She had learned it decades ago, she explained, and it had stayed in her fingers. One evening after a community music hour, a teenage girl approached Sister Margaret shyly. She was maybe 16, with purple streaks in her dark hair and multiple piercings in her ears. She looked like she didn't belong in a convent. "Excuse me," the girl said quietly. "I just wanted to say, that was beautiful. I don't really do the whole church thing, but I came because my friend said it was peaceful here." Sister Margaret smiled at her. "Did you find it peaceful?" "Yeah," the girl said, and her eyes were bright. "When you played, it was like, I don't know. Like everything stopped being so loud in my head, like I could finally breathe." Sister Margaret took the girl's hand gently. "That's what music does. It makes space for us to breathe, to feel, to be." "Did you always want to be a nun?" the girl asked suddenly. Sister Margaret laughed softly. "No, when I was your age, I wanted to be a famous pianist. I wanted to play in concert halls all over the world. So why didn't you?" "Because I found something better," Sister Margaret said simply. "I found a way to play for people who needed the music most. Not people who paid for tickets, but people who needed to breathe, just like you." The girl thought about this. "Don't you ever regret it? Giving up the fame and everything?" Sister Margaret looked around the chapel, at the simple wooden pews, at the people slowly filing out, their faces peaceful. At Sister Anne waiting patiently by the door to walk back with her. "Not once," she said. "Not even for a moment. The seasons turned." Sister Margaret continued to play almost every day. During services, during recreation time, during the monthly community music hours. Her fingers grew a bit stiffer with age, and she couldn't play quite as fast as she used to. But the emotion in her music only deepened. Mother Superior Catherine had changed too. She smiled more. She listened more. She had learned that being a good leader didn't mean being the strictest. It meant helping people become the best versions of themselves. She often sat in the back of the chapel during Sister Margaret's performances, her eyes closed, her face peaceful. One day she approached Sister Margaret after morning prayers. "I want to apologize again," she said, "for those 6 months, for what I took from you." Sister Margaret shook her head. "You gave it back. That's what matters. But I should never have taken it in the first place." "Perhaps," Sister Margaret said gently. "It needed to be taken away so I could understand how precious it was. So we could all understand. Maybe those 6 months of silence taught us something important about the value of music, of joy, of using our gifts." Mother Superior Catherine considered this. "You're very wise." "I'm very old," Sister Margaret laughed. "There's a difference. 5 years passed. 5 years of music filling St. Catherine's Convent. 5 years of community music hours that touched hundreds of lives. 5 years of meals served in the expanded kitchen, of warm rooms in winter, of a community that had rediscovered its heart." Sister Margaret turned 86. Her hands were more arthritic now. Some days they hurt too much to play. But she played when she could, and when she couldn't, the other sisters would sit with her and hum the melodies she had taught them. One spring morning, Sister Margaret didn't come to breakfast. Sister Beth went to check on her and found her still in bed, struggling to breathe. They called the doctor, but everyone knew. Sister Margaret's time was coming to an end. They moved her to the infirmary, making her as comfortable as possible. All the sisters took turns sitting with her. Mother Superior Catherine held her hand for hours. "Thank you," the Mother Superior whispered, "for teaching me, for being patient with me, for showing me what really matters." Sister Margaret smiled weakly. "The music," she whispered. "Don't lock it away again. Promise me." "Never," Mother Superior Catherine said firmly. "I promise." On her final day, they did something special. They carefully moved Sister Margaret's bed into the chapel. They positioned it near the piano, and one by one, the sisters who had learned from her played. Sister Beth, who had been taking lessons, played a simple hymn. Sister Anne, despite her arthritis, played a few notes of amazing grace. Even Mother Superior Catherine, who had secretly been learning, played a short piece she had practiced for weeks. Sister Margaret listened to each one, her eyes closed, a smile on her face. Her fingers moved slightly against the blanket, keeping time with the music. As the sun set through the stained glass windows, casting colored light across the chapel, Sister Margaret took her last breath. She passed peacefully, surrounded by her sisters, surrounded by music. At her funeral, the chapel was packed. Not just the sisters, but hundreds of people from the community. The homeless men from the kitchen. The young mothers with their children. The teenager with purple hair, now in college. Eleanor Vandermeer, who had traveled from across the state. All of them had been touched by Sister Margaret's gift, and the piano stood at the front of the chapel, its lid open wide, draped with white lilies. A testament to a gift that had finally come home. After the funeral, Mother Superior Catherine made an announcement. They would establish a music program at St. Catherine's. They would give free piano lessons to children from the neighborhood who couldn't afford them. They would continue the community music hours. Sister Margaret's legacy would live on. The piano would never be locked again. Years later, children's laughter and piano scales would echo through the halls of St. Catherine's. Young fingers would learn on the same keys that Sister Margaret had.